for the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. Good evening, everyone. My name's David Taylor, and I'm the Assistant Director of Access Services at Public Record Office Victoria. PROV acknowledges the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of any community who may be participating this evening. Thanks for your interest in the Local History Grants program and certainly for attending this information session tonight. We're delighted that the program has been funded for another round, and at this stage we're awaiting advice from government on funding for future years. PROV's role is to preserve and make access to the historical record of state and local government in Victoria, while the work that you're involved in is about preserving and promoting local community history. We see the Local History Grants program as complementary to our work and such an important part of all the things that we all do to connect Victorians to their shared histories. So tonight's session is designed to provide you with what you need to know to make a successful application. As you would be aware, the program is very competitive. We have a limited pool of funds and we aim to make as good a use of those funds as is possible. Each year we're able to fund 50 projects, hopefully in full, but the judges can also decide to part fund some projects. It's essential that you read the guidelines carefully and follow all the requirements. For example, if quotes aren't provided, the judges can't determine the application's eligibility and the application will be automatically declined. We simply don't have the resources to chase up further details from applicants, apart from where we may need to clarify one or two things. So tonight, throughout the session, please ask questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. And there'll be time at the end to ask further questions. And also you can always email a question to grants@prov.vic.gov.au. Rochelle is going to be taking us through the presentation tonight, and Grace is going to be responding to questions, and I'll do the same thing as well. So good luck with your application, and I hope you find the session informative and useful. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Hopefully you are seeing the slide that we have on the screen, our introduction slide for the Local History Grants Program information session. So as David said, my name is Rochelle, and in this information session, I will be providing an overview of the program and addressing some key areas, including eligibility, how to apply, and giving some examples of previously funded projects. As David said, there'll be an opportunity at the end to ask any questions. So Grace, the Manager of the Community Engagement at Public Record Office Victoria, she's also joining us this evening and will be overseeing the questions. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please just type them into the Q&A box and Grace will do her best to answer some of those questions as we go along. And then we will endeavour to answer as many as we can at the end. The grants team, we are available to provide general advice about applying, about eligibility and about the grant process. However, we're not able to provide advice specific to your project, but we might be able to refer you to appropriate sources and resources. So the Local History Grants Program encourages and fosters community activities that preserve, record and share the local, social and community history of Victoria and Victorians. The program supports the efforts of the many community groups and organisations that collect and preserve the materials and memories from Victoria's past, and it aims to encourage collaboration and partnership between volunteer groups to undertake projects, as well as developing skills and building resources to support community collections. The program is administered by PROV and is supported by the Victorian State Government through the Community Support Fund. The Victorian Government recognises that community history is an important part of Victoria. Through the Local History Grants, the Victorian Government provides support to community-based organisations for the preservation and care of Victoria's rich cultural heritage. The grants also recognise the importance of increasing the public's access to our state's history through a diverse range of platforms and experiences. With the program, small grants of up to $15,000 are available for funding of a variety of local community-based organisations who are interested in telling the stories from their own communities, preserving their collections and increasing opportunities for the public to engage. The grants are required to be fully expended and the project completed and acquitted within a 3-year period. To be eligible for a grant, your organisation must meet the following criteria as outlined on this slide. So your organisation must be based in Victoria, be not-for-profit, and in addition, the organisation will also need to be either registered with Consumer Affairs Victoria as an incorporated body, association or co-op, or to be auspiced by a group that has this status, and also has an Australian business number or be auspiced by a group with an ABN. Funding will not be provided to individuals, to organisations that have an incomplete or overdue project funded in a previous round of the Local History Grants Program. If you do have a current outstanding grant, you won't be eligible to apply for funding until your acquittal has been submitted and approved. The Victorian Government is also now taking a whole of government approach to this. So if you have any other grants with outstanding milestones or acquittals, we do strongly recommend finalising these before submitting your application in case it has an impact on your eligibility checks. Funding will also not be provided to commercial organisations or bodies established for profit-making purposes, state government authorities, organisations that do not meet the eligibility criteria as outlined in the previous slide, or organisations that have failed to abide by the terms and conditions of a previously awarded local history grant. Applications from organisations affiliated with or funded through state or federal government will be considered provided the project is undertaken in partnership with a community-based organisation that meets the eligibility criteria and that the project demonstrates strong community involvement and lasting benefit. Some examples of partnership organisations can include local councils, universities, libraries, for example. This slide here shows some examples of projects that could be considered for funding. It is not an exhaustive list, so if you have an idea for a project that's not on the list, it still may be considered. So some examples include the recording of oral histories, the preparation of local history e-publications, conservation and or cataloguing of objects, the development and production of exhibitions, online projects that provide local history information or resources, including online exhibitions and websites, training in local history or collection management skills that are not already accessible via state government bodies, the design and production of interpretation panels and signage for heritage sites and walks, the digitisation and online publishing of collection items and local history information, digital storytelling, including film, podcasts and augmented reality experiences, apps for mobile phones, consultancy fees for specialist skills not found within your organisation, the purchase of archival quality materials to house collections and or museum standard storage and display cases, newspaper and microfilm microfiche digitisation projects, and information technology equipment and assets such as things like scanners, hard drives or cameras for digitising projects. Now, although items such as information technology, digitising equipment, display cases, archival shelving, things like that will be considered for funding, you need to demonstrate in your application the organisation's need and the ongoing use of the equipment beyond the life of the project. So it may also be that for a digitisation project, for example, it may be more cost effective to actually outsource the digitisation than to purchase the equipment to do so. If you access our application guidelines, there is a resources section at the back that has a list of some potential service providers that do things like digitisation services as well as other relevant services. We do know that Prov does not endorse any particular website or individual, even if it's on that list. There are a number of things that will not be considered for funding. So the Local History Grants Program does not fund projects that are related to history outside the state of Victoria, hard copy printed publications, so that includes things like books or brochures, for example, digitising of temporary or permanent public records, launch events, catering, marketing, advertising, promotion, media and travel costs, development of cataloguing software, things like that already exist, capital works such as building and infrastructure projects, cash prizes, commercial gifts or grants to third parties, and also retrospective costs. So costs that the organisation has already paid for out of its own funds, or costs that have been incurred prior to the successful grants being awarded. Other things that will not be considered for funding include ongoing operational costs, such as salaries for ongoing positions, rent, utilities. This includes salary costs for staff who may be managing or involved in the project, as well as salary paid to board members, staff or volunteers of the organisation acting as a consultant. Applicants who do not meet the eligibility criteria, applications not submitted in the format specified, which is the online application form, applications submitted after the funding round has officially closed, projects that will be completed prior to receipt of funds and or outside of the 3-year completion of the funding round, and applications that do not include supporting document, such as written approval from project partners and participants, if that's relevant to the project, and quotes. It's really important to note that is a requirement that a quote is attached to your application for every local history grant funded item listed in the application. If there are no quotes or if there are missing quotes, the application is not eligible. Now, before starting your application, we do strongly recommend that you read the application guidelines, which provide important information about the eligibility criteria, the application and the judging process. A list of frequently asked questions is also available, and the guidelines and the frequently asked questions can both be found on the Prov website by navigating to the Local History Grants page. That page also has the link to the online application form. There's an Apply Now button that you can click on, and that will take you to the form. All grant applications must be submitted online using that form. When you click on the application form, you will be asked to register as an online user. You can set up a username and a password, and that will allow you to, you can type into the application form and save it for later, so you don't need to fill it in all in the one time. You can come back at a later date to complete it. If you have registered for that online process previously in previous rounds, you can use your existing registration details to log in. Now, you just need to make sure that the online application form is completed by a person who is authorised to submit the grant on behalf of the organisation. And we do recommend that you start the application process early to allow sufficient time to obtain the necessary supporting documents. And on the slide here is the website address to go to the Local History Grants program page, or you can go straight to the page and find it that way, or Google it and that will take you there as well. So some things to consider in completing your application. You need to ensure that you have completed all mandatory questions before submitting your application, and the mandatory questions will have a little asterisk beside them on the application form, so you'll know which ones of those they are. The application form actually doesn't allow you to move to the next page or to submit the application if those questions are left blank. You will also need to provide an accurate and detailed budget breakdown outlining the use of the Local History Grant Program funds. And when filling in the budget, please make sure that the total income of the project is exactly the same as the total expenditure of the project, and that should be the same as the amount that you are applying for. We strongly recommend that you read the application guidelines for more detailed information about completing the budget section, as there are instructions on there as to whether you need to include GST in your total or not. That can be different based on your organisation. And there is also a separate question in the application form if your project has other sources of funding or in-kind funding, things like that. Now, once again, as part of your application, you will need to submit supporting documentation, such as copies of letters from partner organisations and individual agreements with auspice organisations, if that's relevant to your project. You also need to ensure quotes are included for all local history grant funded goods or services. Your application will not make it past the eligibility stage if you're missing these documents. So that's really important to note. All supporting documents can be uploaded towards the end of the application form. There's a page there that allows you to upload those. There is space for 6 documents, and you can only have 1 document per each of those 6 items. So if you find that you have more than 6 documents, you can merge them together into the one and then upload it that way. We also ask that you please ensure to list or type in the names of your attachments into the additional information question of the application form. And that's to allow us, the grants team, to ensure that all the attachments have been received successfully. If they're not listed, we will assume that they were never attached if they haven't been successfully submitted. It's also important to note that applications that do not provide evidence of partner support, if applicable, and quotes will not be considered further, that incomplete or late applications will not be considered. Applications submitted in any other format than the online application form will not be accepted. Changes and revisions to grant applications will not be accepted after the grants close. Applicants will receive a receipt of their submission and a reference number once you click submit. That will come through via email, and the email also has a link that will allow you to download a PDF of your application form with all the responses in there. So that can be useful to save for your reference for later on as well. And submission of an application does not necessarily result in funding approval. As David mentioned, it is a very competitive program. Now, once the grant round closes, there are a number of stages of the assessment process. The grants team begins by undertaking eligibility checks that will determine which applications will move to the next stage. So that looks at things like the organisation type, ABN, whether supporting documentation have been attached, etc. Once that's done, the eligible applications are assessed by an independent panel which consists of a minimum of 5 judges. And the judges appointed to the panel bring together a range of expertise and backgrounds, and it can include representatives from fields such as history and heritage, cultural and social history, archives, museum collection management, curators, academics, multicultural programs, other related areas similar to those. So the judging panel assess all projects against the judging and assessment criteria, which are outlined in the application guidelines. And the applications are ranked in order of the judge's final assessment, and then shortlisted projects will be considered for funding until all the funds have been distributed. The final stage is the list of recommended projects is forwarded to the Minister for Government Services for approval, and successful projects will be announced after this process has been finalised. So we're expecting that this will be in about June of next year, June 2024, and all applicants will receive an email with the outcome of their application, whether it was successful or unsuccessful. So as I said, project applications are assessed against the following criteria as outlined in this slide and in the application guidelines. So we do highly recommend that you refer to the criteria when completing your application form responses. So to strengthen your application, please ensure that your project meets the following points: that it has clear aims and objectives. So the application describes what the project is and why it's being completed. It has clear, excuse me, and well-defined strategies for the delivery of the project, and it provides evidence to support this. It has a clearly defined end product and outcome. It demonstrates the relationship between the organisation's core aims and objectives and the project outcome. Illustrates how your project will result in the preservation, recording, and/or increased access to Victorian history. It clearly outlines project participants, whether internal or external, for the organisation, and it provides evidence for the relationships when necessary. So that could be, for example, written acknowledgement of participation from external partners. It provides evidence of strong support and/or involvement for the project from local community. It provides clear and realistic costings as to how the grant money will be spent, as demonstrated in the application budget. And it provides tangible evidence of the costings outlined in the budget by attaching quotes for all the funded aspects. It demonstrates community benefit and ongoing value. So examples might be development of new skills, networks established, improving access or awareness. You also want to make sure that it demonstrates understanding of audience and how the final product will benefit them, and it provides evidence of how that benefit will be measured. Communicates local historical information to a broader audience. So that's an audience beyond the immediate organisation and its member base. And it outlines a well-developed project plan with realistic milestones and timeframes, and demonstrates the capability of the organisation to deliver and implement the project within those timeframes. The project will be completed within 3 years after the awarding of the grant if the application is successful. And finally, that overall, it provides value for money and is well executed in what it delivers. This slide here just has an overview of the timeline for the round. So as you'll likely be aware, the applications opened last Monday, the 16th of October, and they will close on Monday, the 11th of December. We're anticipating that notification of successful and unsuccessful grant recipients will occur from June 2024. However, due to circumstances outside our control, sometimes you may hear a little later than that date. And then the grant payments will occur from June 2024, and they are made on receipt of a signed funding agreement and other required documentation from the successful grant recipients. If you are successful in receiving a grant, there are a number of reporting requirements to undertake. So it is required that a yearly progress report is provided until the project is complete. So that's usually a 12-month and a 24-month report. And then a final report and acquittal is provided on the completion of your project, and that must be received by the end of June 2027. Any changes, no matter how small, to the project from the initial application do require the completion of a project variation form submitted to the grants team for approval, and not abiding by these reporting requirements can have an impact upon future grant applications. On the local history grants page of the PROV website, there is a full list of previous grant recipients for all our previous rounds. In round 21, which was last year's round, there were 42 projects that received funding, and some examples of those projects are shown on this slide here. So some of the funded projects include the Australian Red Cross Society of Victoria, who received $12,342 for their project preserving community textiles from the Australian Red Cross Heritage Archives. The Charlton Golden Grains Museum received $2,500 for the conservation of their taxidermy bird display. And Switchboard Victoria were awarded $11,890 for an oral history project. Excuse me. A number of successful grant case studies are also available on the PROV website on the online blog, so they can be useful to look into and have a read of to see the types of projects that have been done in the past. A couple of examples we'll show you in the next two slides. So the first one is this one, which is $15,000 grant that was awarded to the Ballarat and District Aboriginal Cooperative, BADAC. That was awarded in round 17 for their project BADAC 40 Years Strong, to celebrate its achievement of providing 43 years of health, social welfare and community development programs to Ballarat's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. BADAC, with the help of a local history grant, created a website called BADAC Stories. Although the project was initially envisaged as an ebook, this significant oral history project produced a website with text and archival newspaper articles, as well as video interviews. Their project manager, Marianne Ross, advised these important stories should be told directly by the elders and BADAC community. Even in the 21st century, the oral tradition is still really strong. The elders are fantastic storytellers. So as BADAC continues to grow, so does the BADAC Stories website. The co-op thinks of the website as a live project with the potential to upload additional interviews over time. They found that originally a lot more videos were uploaded than originally planned, because as momentum built during the filming and during the project, more people from the community were keen to be involved. And they hope that the project continues long-term, instilling pride in the local community for generations to come. Another successfully awarded project was again from round 17. That was a $15,000 grant awarded to Dried Fruits Australia for their project, Dried Vine Fruits Industry Preservation of 100 Years of History. So when Anne Mansell became the CEO of Dried Fruits Australia in 2017, she noticed that there was a vast collection of historical materials stored in their Mildura offices. That material was squirreled away in filing cabinets, piled on shelves, and stuffed into boxes with vague descriptions. And a lot of items of historical importance sat alongside office supplies throughout various meeting rooms, corridors, and sheds. So not only were many of the paper items starting to deteriorate, but they were also losing contextual information as those with first-hand knowledge got older. So thanks to the local history grants, this all changed. The Dried Fruits Australia decided to break up their quite extensive project into 2 stages. So firstly, they received a grant to undertake a preservation needs assessment, and they then received a subsequent grant to fund the recommendations of this assessment to undertake cataloguing and conservation work. And this has meant that their collection is now safe for many years to come, with a reference tool for ease of access. So you can find further information and links on the Prov website by navigating to the local history grants page. That page has information about projects that were successful in previous rounds, information about the current round 22, and links to both the application guidelines and to the application form. Information is also available through the Prov social media sites. And if you have any questions, you can always email the grants team at the email address on this slide, grants@prov.vic.gov.au. So I would like to thank you all for your attendance this evening. And we will open up to any questions that I think maybe some of those have been coming through.
So answered all the ones we've had so far. So we've got another sort of good 20 minutes worth of questions if people wanted to ask us anything else. Please just feel free to type it into the chat.
Now, some questions have already come through via email. We do recommend, if you have quite a specific question specific to your project, if you email that through to us at the grants@prov.vic.gov.au email address, we can then correspond with you directly and speak more in depth about your project or your question around that. We did get a question through about where to find professional services for getting quotes for digitisation of objects, photographs, things like that. So as I mentioned before, there is the resources list at the end of the application guidelines that has a number of links to potential professionals and services. So that can be a good starting point. We also do say sometimes people might have submitted an application last round that was unsuccessful. If that is the case for you, you can also email us if you're wanting feedback, judges' feedback on your application from last year, if you feel that would be helpful if you're planning on doing another application this round.
Okay, so we've got a question. It says, the museum I volunteer at has objects that come from New South Wales that I would like to record the story of. Also has Victorian objects. The objects are in a Victorian museum. Would that be covered in the grant?
Let's see. So to be eligible, the project does need to focus on Victorian history. So if the objects and the stories around those are from interstate, then no, those objects would not be eligible within that. If you were applying for a project, it would have to be based on your Victorian collection.
So I had a question earlier, Rochelle, as well about there's a museum that's about 15 kilometres from the border, and they were interested in telling oral stories around travelling, sort of crossing the Mount Cosie, crossing the Murray River. Would that be considered? So I said yes, because that sort of could be a story that, say, originated in Victoria. You know, it's not specific to New South Wales, but what's probably worth mentioning for everybody to listen is the panel will sort of prefer projects that are, I mean, obviously a story about Victoria, but that is of interest to other Victorians, you know, has a strong Victorian focus. So while we're, while we'll say, you know, certainly apply, you've got to sort of make sure that your project is about Victoria and is of interest to lots of Victorians, and sort of think about it that way. If you've got to compete against, say, 200 other groups, the judges have to see how the story you're telling is of interest to the Victorian community. So another question, are more specific projects preferred over broader ones? For example, would a preservation need assessment of a large and varied collection of historical records be too broad?
Not necessarily. It's not so much, is it a more specific one preferred over a broader one? It's more how you write your application to make justification as to why you're applying and what the benefit of the outcome would be. It is important to consider if your project has lots of elements, for example. Sometimes it could perhaps be more helpful to break those up and focus on more detailed stages, so the separate elements over time, rather than try and put them all together into the one project. If you get funding in one round, that doesn't mean that you are then not eligible to apply in subsequent rounds, if the funding is made available, of course. So because if you had been awarded or were successful in a previous round, that doesn't necessarily impact your likelihood or not of getting funded in subsequent rounds. So sometimes it can be better to break up a very large project into sections and have a more detailed specific section, rather than try to fit everything into a very large project. But again, it depends on the circumstances. There's not, the panel aren't looking for specific things. It's more just making sure that your application is quite detailed and you're making a good case for why you're putting forward this project, and it's well thought out and described. Hopefully that answers your question.
So that's all we've got, all the questions we've got sort of waiting for us at the moment.
Well, that sounds great. Hopefully we've answered any questions that have come through. Of course, if you have any questions, anything that pops up, or you need any further clarification, please just send us an email through to that grants email address, grants@prov.vic.gov.au, and we can answer you that way as well. We're always open to any questions that come through. So once again, thank you all very much for your time and for attending the session this evening. And we look forward to receiving your applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending. Yes, now.